August 26, 1346. The French army had every conceivable advantage. 30,000 soldiers against 9,000 Englishmen, the best knights in Europe, and a battle on their own soil. It seemed that the outcome was a foregone conclusion, and that the small English army would simply be wiped off the face of the earth. But on that day, something happened on the field at Crécy that changed the rules of warfare forever. One technology, perfected by simple peasants, put an end to centuries of aristocratic cavalry domination. It was not just a battle, but the execution of an entire era. Watch the video to the end to find out how a handful of archers made knights obsolete in a single battle, and why that day became a black day for the European aristocracy. What if I told you that absolutely everything you firmly believed about medieval knights and their invincibility is a romantic untruth and a myth? Before the famous Battle of Crecy in 1346, the typical French knight was the embodiment of the military power and technological superiority of his time. He was clad in the finest steel armor that the advanced technology of the time could produce for a huge sum of money, and sat proudly on a powerful war horse, specially trained since childhood, which cost a fortune. This was the pinnacle of Europe's military elite, accustomed to victory over any opponent and undefeated by commoners throughout centuries of domination. For the proud French noblemen of high birth, war was above all a matter of personal honor, knightly glory, and an opportunity for enrichment through ransoms. They rode confidently into battle, as if it were another tournament or celebration, joyfully anticipating individual duels with worthy opponents and rich spoils in the form of ransoms for prisoners. The very idea that they, noble warriors, could be seriously opposed by some despicable commoners without pedigree seemed deeply offensive and absurd to them. The knights considered themselves invincible warriors, created for war by God himself, and did not perceive the infantry as a serious threat to their dominance on the battlefield. Their combat tactics were extremely simple, straightforward, and proven by many centuries of successful battles. A powerful, unified frontal attack by heavy armored cavalry en masse on the center of the enemy formation. This crushing blow from armored horsemen at full gallop was supposed to easily crush any enemy infantry, turning an organized formation into a chaotic, panicked retreat in a matter of minutes. They had no doubt about their success and believed that this time, too, everything would go according to the usual, proven scenario, ending in their triumphant victory. The French knights were blinded by their past successes and saw no need to change the tactics that had worked for centuries against feudal militias. King Edward III's English army, on the other hand, consisted mainly of ordinary common people without titles or coats of arms. They were yeomen, free, prosperous peasant landowners who, from early childhood, had stubbornly learned to wield not an expensive knight's sword, which required strength, but a long yew bow as tall as a man, which required years of training. For them, harsh warfare was not a knightly tournament or a celebration, but hard, dangerous work that had to be done professionally for their king and country in order to return home alive. They did not seek personal glory, but wanted to survive and receive their modest pay for their service. Their psychology and worldview were completely different, radically different from that of knights. They did not seek individual glory in one-on-one duels, but acted as a single, coordinated fighting mechanism under the command of experienced officers. Each disciplined archer knew exactly where he belonged in the dense formation, and understood that his personal life and survival depended directly on the discipline, training, and reliability of his neighbors on the right and left. Individualism was deadly dangerous, while collective action was the key to victory and survival for the entire unit. This fundamental contrast between the armies was not simply a difference in weaponry or tactics, but a real clash between two diametrically opposed worlds and philosophies of warfare. On one side stood the aristocratic military elite, with its archaic code of chivalry, individualism, and pursuit of personal glory in combat. On the other side stood a professional, well-trained army of disciplined commoners, relying entirely on iron discipline, coordinated collective action, and new tactics. It was a clash between the old feudal world and the emerging new order, where professionalism triumphed over noble birth. On that fateful August day in 1346 at Crécy, these two opposing philosophies of war and worldviews were about to clash in a decisive, bloody battle that would determine the future. The self-confident French knights did not yet know or suspect that their traditional idea of knightly combat was hopelessly outdated and no longer worked. They proudly rode into battle, not toward unexpected glory and triumph, but toward the complete and utter collapse of their entire feudal era and value system. Crecy would become a symbol of the end of the era of knightly dominance on the battlefield and the beginning of a new era of professional armies. Their expensive steel armor, which cost an ordinary family a fortune, was supposed to provide reliable protection against any known cold weapon of the time: swords, spears, axes. But they were completely unprepared and ill-equipped for the deadly weapon that the cunning English King Edward III had specially prepared for them at their chosen position. It was a revolutionary military technology involving the massive use of long-range weapons, against whose destructive power their renowned steel proved virtually powerless and useless. The English longbow pierced armor at a distance where knights could not respond, which completely changed the rules of war. Before the battle began, the far-sighted King Edward III of England made a strategic decision that many of his own nobles and knights sincerely considered extremely strange and humiliating to their dignity. He categorically ordered his English knights to dismount from their horses and stand shoulder to shoulder with ordinary peasant archers in a single formation, which was unheard of. It was a revolutionary, unprecedented step that equated a noble aristocrat with a simple peasant in battle, which contradicted the entire feudal hierarchy. For many knights, it was an insult to their honor, but they obeyed the king's order, trusting his military genius. It was this unusual alliance of aristocrats and commoners united by a common goal that was the key to the English crushing victory over a numerically superior enemy. He effectively countered the traditional French cavalry attack with an unbreakable defensive wall of steel formed by dismounted knights and thousands of deadly arrows flying in a continuous stream. The attacking French never understood until the very end what exactly they were facing on the battlefield, why their attacks were repeatedly repelled by this wall of fire and steel. They continued to attack according to the old rules, not realizing that the rules of war had changed forever that day. It would be very interesting to hear your balanced opinion on these events. What exactly do you think about this historical clash between an aristocratic feudal army based on individual valor and a professional peasant army based on discipline and technology? Write your detailed thoughts in the comments below. Want to know the secret that changed the course of war in Europe? That secret was the English longbow. This weapon was not just a piece of wood, but the pinnacle of technology and years of training that turned the English army into the most deadly force of its time. The longbow was made from a single piece of yew wood, using wood that combined both heartwood and sapwood. This gave the bow a unique combination of flexibility and power. Its length often exceeded the height of the archer himself, reaching almost 2 meters. The tension of such a bow was enormous, sometimes reaching 80 kilograms. To draw it required not only strength, but also a special technique that was taught from early childhood. Archaeologists find skeletons of English archers with deformed shoulder and spine bones. Such was the price of wielding this weapon. The main advantage of the longbow was its rate of fire. An experienced archer could shoot 10 to 12 arrows per minute. This was 3 or even 4 times faster than a crossbowman, whom the English would have to face. Arrows fired from such a bow had enormous penetrating power. At full speed, They could pierce chainmail or find a vulnerable spot in plate armor. A massive volley of thousands of such arrows created a veritable wall of flying steel. The opponents of the English archers at Crécy were Genoese crossbowmen, considered the best mercenaries in Europe. Their crossbows were powerful and accurate weapons, but they had one critical drawback. They took a long time to reload. To reload a heavy crossbow, a soldier had to rest it on the ground, put his foot in a special stirrup, and pull the string with a winch. This process took a long time, during which an English archer could fire several arrows. Thus, the technological advantage was on the side of the English. In addition, the English army relied on mass numbers. A royal decree was issued requiring all men of a certain age to practice archery every Sunday. This created a huge reserve of trained archers. As a result, by the middle of the 14th century, England possessed a unique military resource. They had an entire army of professional archers capable of creating an unprecedented density of fire on the battlefield. This was their main trump card in the upcoming battle. It was this technology that formed the basis of King Edward's tactics. He knew that no cavalry attack could withstand a barrage of tens of thousands of arrows. All that remained was to choose the right place to exploit this advantage. But even the most sophisticated weapon is useless without a competent strategy. In the next chapter, you will learn how the English king turned the terrain itself into his main ally. Was what I am about to show you a tactical move of a genius or a madman? Realizing that the French had numerical superiority, King Edward III decided not to attack, but to defend. He spent a whole day searching for and preparing the ideal position for his small army. He chose a gentle slope between the villages of Crecy and Vaudecourt. This position gave him several key advantages. First, his army was positioned higher than the enemy, which made any attack difficult. The French knights would have to attack uphill. This slowed down their horses, depriving the cavalry charge of its main components, speed and power. By the time they collided with the English lines, they would already be exhausted. Second, the flanks of the English army were well covered by the forest and the river. This ruled out the possibility of a flanking maneuver and forced the French to attack head-on at the most protected section. Edward imposed his rules of the game on the enemy. Thirdly, the sun was on the English side that day. The battle began towards evening, and the sun was shining directly into the eyes of the advancing French. This blinded them, preventing them from correctly assessing the situation and the location of the English troops. Edward arranged his forces into 3 large divisions. 2 of them stood in the front line, and the third, under his personal command, was in reserve. Mounted knights and spearmen formed the center of each division, and archers were positioned on the flanks in echelons. This arrangement created so-called fire pockets. Any attack on the center of the English positions would inevitably come under crossfire from archers on both flanks. It was a simple but incredibly effective defensive scheme. In addition, according to some sources, the English dug many small pits in front of their positions. These wolf pits were intended to disrupt the formation of the attacking cavalry and cause the horses to stumble. Every element of the landscape was used for defense. King Edward himself took up a position at a mill located on top of a hill. From there, he had an excellent view of the entire battlefield. He could control the course of the battle and bring his reserves into action at the right moment. Thus, even before the first clash, the English gained a huge tactical advantage. They forced the huge but disorganized French army to attack them in a pre-prepared and perfectly chosen position. It was a trap, and the French walked right into it. Guess what happened next? The French army approached the battlefield exhausted after a long march. King Philip VI wanted to give his troops a rest, but his nobles, seeing the small English army, were eager to fight and did not want to wait until morning. The Genoese crossbowmen, about 6,000 men, were the first to be thrown into the attack. Their task was to suppress the English archers and clear the way for the knightly cavalry. However, from the very beginning, everything went wrong. Just before their advance, there was a short but heavy downpour. It wet the crossbow strings, weakening their tension and reducing their effectiveness. The English archers simply removed their strings and hid them under their helmets, keeping them dry. When the Genoese came within firing range and fired their first volley, their bolts did not reach the English positions. They fell without causing any damage. In response, the English archers stepped forward and fired their first devastating volley. Thousands of arrows rained down on the ranks of crossbowmen. The effect was stunning. Unlike the crossbowmen, who were not supposed to wear armor, the archers were protected by light armor and helmets. The Genoese could not withstand such resistance and began to retreat. They were professionals, but they had never encountered such density and speed of fire. Their fighting spirit was broken after the first volley. The French knights standing behind the Genoese took this retreat as cowardice and betrayal. Without understanding the situation, they decided that the mercenaries were interfering with their glorious attack. What happened next determined the outcome of the battle. The Count of Alençon, who commanded the vanguard, gave the order to attack. The French cavalry rushed forward, straight through the ranks of their own retreating crossbowmen. Complete chaos ensued as the knights trampled and cut down their own infantry. It was a catastrophic failure of military command. Instead of an organized attack, there was disorderly movement, mixing different types of troops. The French army attacked itself before it even reached the enemy. The English calmly watched this chaos from their hill. Their archers continued to methodically send volley after volley into this confused mass of people and horses. Edward III's trap worked perfectly. How did this initial chaos affect the main striking force of the French, the knightly cavalry? We will discuss this in the next chapter. It was at this moment that the English archers showed their full power. Tens of thousands of arrows rained down on the attacking cavalry. According to eyewitnesses, the sound of the flying arrows was like the noise of a violent storm. The knights' armor was well protected from the front, but the arrows found vulnerable spots. However, the archers' main target was not the horsemen themselves, but their horses. War horses were much less well protected, and it was they who became the first victims of the English bows. Horses struck by arrows fell, creating real obstacles in the path of subsequent waves of attackers. The cavalry formation was disrupted, and the attack lost its speed and cohesion. Knights thrown to the ground in their heavy armor became helpless. The few who still managed to break through the hail of fire encountered a second line of defense. English knights and spearmen, fighting on foot, met them with a wall of spears and swords. Exhausted after climbing the slope, the French could not break through this formation. The climb up the rain-slicked slope finally exhausted the attacking cavalry. Their attack faltered, never reaching its goal. They were forced to retreat, leaving many of their comrades on the field. But the French command did not learn anything from this failure. Instead of regrouping and changing tactics, they decided to repeat the attack. Knightly honor demanded that they wash away the shame of their first failure. Again and again, the French knights gathered at the foot of the hill and launched themselves into a suicidal attack. Each new wave crashed against the English defenses just like the previous one. They acted without any plan, obeying only blind fury. Meanwhile, the English archers continued their work. They did not engage in close combat, but methodically shot down each new wave of attackers. They had a huge supply of arrows, which were delivered by carts right during the battle. The field in front of the English positions gradually turned into an insurmountable obstacle. This was the price of the French command's stubbornness and inability to adapt to the new reality of war. Their old tactics no longer worked. Are you ready for the shocking truth about knightly honor? What happened next can hardly be called tactics. It was mass, stubborn self-sacrifice, dictated not by common sense, but by a false understanding of valor. The French knights launched no fewer than 15 attacks on the English positions. Each was as chaotic and unsuccessful as the first. They acted in scattered groups, without a unified command or clear plan. The driving force behind these attacks was not military necessity, but personal ambition and feudal pride. Each lord wanted to show his bravery and be the first to break through to the enemy. This led to disunity and huge losses. King Philip VI practically lost control of his army. His orders were ignored, and the nobles acted at their own discretion. The army turned into a mob, where everyone fought for themselves. Among the attackers were allies of the French, such as John the Blind, King of Bohemia. Despite being blind, he ordered his knights to tie his horse to theirs and lead him into the thick of battle. It was a gesture of desperate bravery, but completely pointless from a military point of view. The English, on the other hand, maintained iron discipline. They did not succumb to provocation and did not break formation. They simply stood their ground and did their job, sending arrow after arrow. This battle clearly demonstrated the crisis of knightly military ideology. Individual valor proved helpless in the face of an organized and disciplined army. The era of knightly duels was coming to an end. By nightfall, the French army was completely exhausted and demoralized. The losses were enormous, especially among the nobility. The cream of French knighthood lay dead on the slopes of the hill at Crécy. The English, on the other hand, suffered minimal losses. It was not just a defeat, but a humiliation. The most powerful army in Europe had been defeated by a handful of commoners. It took the French a long time to learn this lesson. But why did the English knights not fight on horseback like their opponents? In the next chapter, we will examine this key tactical move. One of King Edward III's brilliant decisions that predetermined victory was to order his own knights and men-at-arms to dismount. While the French relied on a cavalry charge, the English turned their cavalry into elite heavy infantry. This move had several important tactical consequences. First, the dismounted knights created an incredibly strong defensive center. Standing shoulder to shoulder, they formed a wall of shields and spears that was virtually impossible to break through. Their heavy armor made them almost invulnerable to random arrows and blows. Second, it allowed for an effective combination of heavy infantry and archers. While the archers on the flanks shot at the attackers from a distance, the foot soldiers in the center were ready to meet the few who broke through. It was the perfect combination of long-range and close-range combat. Thirdly, it had a huge moral impact on the entire army. Ordinary archers saw that lords and counts stood with them in the same formation, sharing all the dangers. This strengthened morale and created a sense of unity that the French so sorely lacked. Fighting on foot, the English aristocrats could not succumb to the temptation to rush into individual attacks in pursuit of glory. They were forced to act as part of a unified whole, obeying common discipline. This completely eliminated the chaos that reigned in the French army. Their main task was to withstand the onslaught and protect the archers. If the French knights managed to break through the wall of arrows, they encountered fresh forces of English men-at-arms. Exhausted by the march and the battle, they could no longer fight effectively. This tactic was not new to the English. They had already used it successfully in wars with the Scots. But at the Battle of Crecy, it was used against a classic knightly army, and the result exceeded all expectations. It showed that heavy infantry in defense could be stronger than attacking cavalry. The French, seeing the dismounted English knights, probably perceived this as a weakness. They could not understand why anyone would voluntarily give up their main advantage, a war horse. But this was precisely Edward's tactical genius. He sacrificed mobility for the sake of defensive strength. He understood that in the specific conditions of this battle, on this hill, it was the steadfastness of the infantry that would be the key to victory. And he was not mistaken. Thus, the English victory was achieved not only thanks to the archers. It was the result of the competent interaction of all branches of the army. Every soldier, from a simple archer to a count, knew his task and carried it out with cold efficiency. The Battle of Crecy was a moment of glory not only for the English bow, but also for the heir to the throne. The right flank of the English army was commanded by King Edward's son, the 16-year-old Prince of Wales, who went down in history as the Black Prince. For the young heir, this was his first serious battle. The king deliberately entrusted his son with one of the most responsible sections. He wanted the prince to prove his right to be the future king and commander. It was a risky but well-thought-out decision. At the most intense moment of the battle, one of the French attacks nearly broke through the defenses in the prince's sector. The situation became critical. The Earl of Warwick, who was the young Edward's tutor, sent a messenger to the king with a request for help. The messenger found the king at his observation post near the mill. He conveyed the Earl's request, informing him that the prince was in great danger. King Edward III's response has gone down in history. He asked the messenger if his son was still alive. Receiving an affirmative answer, the king refused to send reinforcements. He said, "Let the boy earn his spurs," meaning let him prove himself worthy of knighthood. The king added that he wanted all the glory of that day to belong to his son. He saw that the overall situation on the battlefield was under control, and he used this critical moment to educate the future monarch. This response was conveyed to the prince and his soldiers. It inspired them to a new feat. They understood that there was no help coming and that they had to stand their ground until the end. Gathering all their strength, the prince's soldiers repelled the fierce French attack. This episode became legendary. It demonstrated the composure and foresight of King Edward III as a commander and father. He trusted his son and his soldiers and was confident in their resilience. For Prince Edward, this day marked the beginning of his brilliant military career. He earned the respect of the entire army and proved himself a worthy heir. His personal bravery became one of the symbols of the victory at Crécy. When the fog cleared the next morning, the English saw the full extent of their victory. The field in front of their positions was littered with the bodies of French knights and their horses. The scale of the disaster that had befallen the French army was enormous. The English began to count the enemy's losses. The French king's brother and nephew, 2 dukes, 12 counts, and more than 1,500 knights and nobles had been killed. The total French losses, including infantry, are estimated at 10,000 men or more. The English losses were incomparably small. According to various estimates, they ranged from 100 to 300 men. Such a ratio of losses was unprecedented for medieval battles and clearly demonstrated the effectiveness of English tactics. The victory at Crecy had enormous political and military consequences. It allowed Edward III to continue his campaign unhindered and lay siege to the important port city of Calais. The capture of Calais gave England a strategic foothold on the continent, which they held for more than 200 years. The military prestige of French knighthood was completely destroyed. It became clear that the old methods of warfare no longer worked. The battle showed that well-organized infantry, armed with effective long-range weapons, could defeat any cavalry. This battle went down in history as one of the most decisive tactical victories. It marked the beginning of the end of an entire era, an era where armored aristocrats on horseback dominated the battlefield. The Battle of Crecy in August 1346 was not just another tactical victory of one army over another on the battlefield. It was a true historical condemnation of an entire outdated social and military system based on chivalry, feudal hierarchy, and individual valor. On that fateful August day, it became clear to everyone that the era of feudal heavy cavalry on the battlefield was irrevocably coming to an end, giving way to new forms of army organization. The world of medieval warfare, which had existed for centuries, collapsed in a single day under a hail of English arrows, and nothing could restore it to its former state. The main strategic lesson of Crecy was a fundamental discovery. Iron discipline and precise organization of troops unconditionally defeat simple numerical superiority and the individual knightly valor of individual warriors. The English army, relatively small in number but well-trained and commanded by experienced leaders, where each soldier clearly knew his place and task in the overall plan, crushed the huge but chaotic and poorly coordinated feudal militia of the French. It was an unconditional triumph of military professionalism, systematic training, and discipline over aristocratic amateurism, self-confidence, and outdated ideas about warfare. Crecy proved that organization is more important than bravery, and that collective action is more effective than individual feats on the modern battlefield. The English longbow convincingly showed all of Europe that a trained commoner peasant, armed with modern effective weapons and undergoing systematic training, could successfully and effectively oppose an elite warrior knight in expensive armor, defeating him at a distance. The social divide between classes on the battlefield began to rapidly disappear under the influence of technology. The real value and effectiveness of a warrior was no longer determined by his noble origins or long pedigree, but by his practical combat skills, training, and ability to use weapons effectively. This was a revolutionary change in worldview, undermining the foundations of feudal society, where status was determined by birth. The bloody battle convincingly demonstrated to all contemporaries the increased decisive role of organized infantry in warfare. For many centuries, infantry had traditionally been considered a secondary auxiliary branch of the military, whose task was only to support the main attack of the noble knights and finish off the wounded. Now, however, well-organized infantry in a well-chosen defense had convincingly shown that it could decide the outcome of a major battle entirely on its own, without the help of cavalry. Infantry went from being a support force to the main striking force of the army, which completely changed the structure of the armed forces and the requirements for their training and armament. King Edward III's innovative tactics, which masterfully combined the strong defensive capabilities of heavy infantry with the devastating firepower of massive volleys from thousands of archers, became the classic model for many years to come. It determined the main direction of development of European military art and tactics for several decades to come. Armies across Europe, learning from French mistakes, began to pay much more attention to training and equipping various types of archers and building a strong, stable line of defense capable of withstanding cavalry attacks. Defensive tactics came to be valued on a par with offensive tactics, which was a new phenomenon in the military affairs of that era. The economic consequences of the defeat were also extremely significant for both sides of the conflict. The cost of a full knight's equipment, including armor, weapons, and a war horse, was truly enormous, comparable to the annual income of an entire village, and the sudden loss of several thousand knights in a single battle was a heavy blow to the economy of France as a whole and its military potential. The English yeoman archer, on the other hand, was much cheaper to train, equip, and maintain, which gave him a huge economic advantage. One English archer cost dozens of times less than a French knight, but on the battlefield he was no less, and sometimes even more, effective, which changed the economics of war. The historic Battle of Crécy marked the real beginning of the so-called infantry revolution in European warfare for centuries to come. In the centuries that followed, it was the numerous infantry, armed first with bows and powerful crossbows, and then with revolutionary firearms, that would become the undisputed queen of the battlefield. The role of traditional heavy cavalry gradually but steadily declined to auxiliary functions: reconnaissance, pursuit of defeated enemies, and flank attacks on weakened areas. Cavalry transformed from the main striking force into an auxiliary branch of the army, which was unimaginable at the beginning of the 14th century for contemporaries. Of course, knighthood as a social class and cultural phenomenon did not disappear instantly on the day after the defeat. It continued to exist and play an important role in society for a long time, several centuries, but its real military significance and dominance on the battlefield steadily and irreversibly declined with each passing decade. The Battle of Crecy dealt it a fatal blow, from the severe consequences of which it was never able to fully recover and restore its former position. Knights gradually transformed from a military elite into a ceremonial aristocracy, preserving traditions but losing their military significance. A whole new era in warfare, based on professionalism and technology rather than ancestry, began on the gentle slopes of a hill near the small French village of Crécy en Ponthieu, forever changing the face of war. We see how a single battle can change the course of history. The Battle of Crecy is not just a story about arrows and armor. It is a story about how discipline, technology, and competent tactics can overcome brute force and outdated ideas about warfare. The English did not just win, they presented the world with a new model of an army, professional, disciplined, and based on the interaction of different branches of the military. This lesson changed European military art forever. What other great battles of the past that changed the course of history would you like to see in our future videos? Suggest your topics in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes.